Frieden seine Hände, Einzige, Gerechte, die will für jedermann das Rechte, sei von seinen hohen Namen, dieser hochgelobet Namen. Gottes ist der Orient, Gottes ist der Okzident. Mich verwirren jedes Irren, doch du weisst mich zu entwirren. Wenn ich Richte, gib du meinem Richte. Gottes ist der Orient, Gottes ist der Okzident. Not und südliches Gelände, ruht in Frieden seiner Hände.
Welcome to the second episode of Liederspiel, featuring the magnanimous Jedermann and myself, Anhad Aurora. This week we are exploring one of the pinnacles of the Lied repertory, Schumann's Gottes ist der Orient, Gottes ist der Okzident, also entitled Talismane, published in 1840 in the collection Murten, which was initially intended as a marital gift for his beloved Clara Wieck. Indeed, the collection was not only bound and presented to the beloved on 12 September 1840, but is infused with the personality of Clara all the way through. Now, in today's little session, I am going to talk briefly about Murten as a collection and Talismane's peculiar position within this collection, before Henrika.
I'm then going to look at the collection as a book object, and we are then together in dialogue looking into the poetry before coming back to the musical setting and concluding with another performance of the song.
Great, so let me begin. As we see in this beautifully bound copy here, Murten is a book primarily, and within this book are many different Orientalist Lieder, mainly taken from Goethe's West-östlicher Divan, which was published in 1819, but was probably in Goethe's mind in about 1814 or 1815 when he made several trips to the Rhineland. In Schumann's reading of the Divan, we have several poems that span the more sensuous side, so the Lied der Zuleika, which is something I'm going to explore later in this series, to the more sacred vision of Oriental and Occidental unity. Talismane sits squarely within that. Murten was published as 4 books, initially bound together then by Kistner in 1840 for general release. In the second book, we start with really quite a sumptuous setting of The Lotus Blume, which was a poem by Heine. So the first of the second heft is The Lotus Blume. That is then immediately followed by Talismane as his heraldic offering to his beloved, signifying the promise of marriage that hopefully was going to befall them both. Henrika?
You can see the title page actually on our blog post, as well as this dedication to Clara. But what I wanted to look at was actually the materiality of this very copy of Schumann, from which we have been performing, and partly because we practiced so hard, this fell off and this uncovered the binding maculature, the binding waste inside, which comes from a Feldpostbrief, a letter that would have been especially thin paper for soldiers printed so that they could write home letters. And that ties in with a date when this book was bought in Karlsruhe, which must have been in the 1918 about, when my great-grandparents were living there. And it's my great-grandmother's hand on the cover. That's her. A marital picture like the one exactly in the bridal state as Clara. And she wrote Benari Lieder von Schumann. And it struck me that this vision of a peaceful togetherness of Orient and Okzident is really making a statement against the war-torn period. So performing in the household of a Prussian officer in 1917-18, Gottes ist der Orient, Gottes ist der Okzident, and to use this as a talisman against the Irren and Wirren of that period is quite significant. And what my great-grandmother, who was also called Clara, Clara Benari, couldn't know was how much significant this volume would hold for her daughter and her granddaughter. So my grandmother, born in 1912, went after her marriage to Turkey, and there lived for the happiest years of her life in Istanbul. And for her, this song became a kind of signature song. And this kept the significance for my mother, who was born on the 28th of August 1942, the day of Goethe's birthday. And so every year she celebrated together with Goethe, and I learned the song as a birthday offering for her. So this very copy holds quite a significance for me, but I think it also shows how poetry and songs are always embedded in a cultural environment and in a personal Aneignung. How you inhabit the song is significant. Now to look more closely at the actual text, I'll again read out the German anhand our Goethe-inspired new literal translation. Gottes ist der Orient, Gottes ist der Okzident. Nord- und südliches Gelände ruhen im Frieden seiner Hände.
The Orient is God's, the Occident is God's, northerly and southerly lands rest in the peace of his hands.
Der Einzige, Gerechte, will für jedermann das Rechte, sei von seinen 100 Namen dieser hochgelobet. Amen.
He, the only one, the righteous one, wants what is right for everyone. May of his 100 names this one be highly praised. Amen.
Mich verwirren will das Irren, doch du weißt mich zu entwirren. Wenn ich handle, wenn ich dichte, gib du meinem Weg die Richte.
Misdirection wants to entangle me, but you know how to untangle me. When I act and think, make straight the way for me.
These are actually 3 stanzas of Goethe's collection headed Talismane in the first book of Buch des Sängers of the Divan. And what Schumann does is that he crafts this into a coherent song in a way like Brahms rearranged the stanzas of the Volkslied in a way that would fit with his musical interpretation. So Schumann takes the first stanza, Gottes ist der Orient, and uses it as an ending for the kind of rondeau structure, and repeats also the first 2 lines of this first stanza in the middle of the poem. So Anhard is demonstrating how Schumann realizes this structure.
Well, I don't really have much to add to what Enrique said actually, because it's a very simple epigrammatic setting. I think that's the whole point of the amulet or the talisman, that was to be intoned by travellers in presumably the desert or in other inhospitable climates. What Schumann does do, which I think is particularly interesting, is have a rising fanfare figure for Okzident, so for Orient, and then for Okzident he has a closing fanfare figure, in effect binding a talisman within a talisman. So for example we have ist der Orient, which is the antecedent, and then the consequent ist der Orient, which is it's a self-standing musical phrase. And this very interesting harmonic and phraseological device enables him to insert it at opportune moments. For example, after hochgelobet, Amen, we have and also at the end of the song when he's about to build in his Amen as this extended refrain, presumably to another sort of talisman that is within the talisman.
Shall we do it once more?
Let's do it.
Ist der Orient.